So just to remind you that we're still talking about determining data collection tools to accomplish goals and objectives. And this video specifically will talk about qualitative tools that you can use to collect new data. There are two main types of qualitative methods that are commonly used: focus groups and interviews. There are other types of qualitative methods, but again, these are the most commonly ones used that we'll talk about these in this class. To learn about focus groups, there's a great video that gives kind of a what not to do in connecting a focus group, and then gives you a what to do in connecting a focus group. This is a great video put on by University of British Columbia.
Hello, is this the big focus group session? Yeah, I think it is. I'm Wendy, if you haven't figured that out by now. Today we're going to talk about faculty and what they know about your learning. So just share with me some ideas of what you want faculty members to know. Sorry. Hey, how's it going? I know, I'm doing a session right now. Yeah, I know. Yeah, don't worry about it. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Please also make sure your phones are off. We want to make sure everything's off so we can actually get the session going. Okay. So, what does faculty know about student learning, and have you used Connect before? I haven't used Connect yet, but I've used Vista. Okay, well, the question is more about math and not about this stuff, so let's try to stay on topic because, like, we don't have to be for hours, so I'm going to say about math, like, anyone else? Have you used math?
Well, I don't know if this is on topic, but I don't think I necessarily learn. I mean, I use discussion boards.
Discussion boards? They don't help you learn? Do you even post? All right, let's just move on to question 2, which is, I don't know. Okay, let's just, do you guys even know, like, how you learn? Like, what's your GPA? Do you, like, pay attention in class? Do you have Facebook? Like, what do you guys do? Why are you asking us? Are you judging us? No, I'm not judging you. I mean, it's actually so defensive. I just want to know, like, what gets in the way of your learning? Like, are you one of those kids that has your laptop looking at Facebook during lectures? Well, there's only 3 of us. We'll chat this up. I'm just going to write down that you guys on Facebook, and we can just, like, conclude this session. Well, thanks for coming.
So hopefully you saw some of these things. It's a little bit of a goofy scenario, but it's great to show what really doesn't work. So these are some of the things they outlined, and you probably noticed these just watching it yourself. So now let's move on. We'll go past this, and we'll see what a good focus group really looks like. And you can pay attention to what the differences were from what you just saw.
Good morning, everyone. The purpose of this focus group is to offer your perspective on how you learn best. This information will be shared anonymously with faculty members, so feel free to give us all your thoughts on how you do that.
Sure. I can the generalization of students all being lazy and unmotivated is just not true. At times, I become unmotivated because of how going classes. On the other hand, I'm super interested in being a coordinator in workshops.
That's a great point, Greg. Now, think back to that time we were before. Can you explain to me more why you're not bored?
Sure,
How do you learn that? Take your time, and face to face. It's feel free to share whatever comes to mind. I like that when I can apply what I learned to my personal life. Great, and Chad, can you explain more about that connection?
What are some barriers to your learning? Think of a time when you were in class and you started sleeping, playing games online, checking Facebook.
I went to YouTube in class.
That's a good example. And how does YouTube impact your learning?
So you can see here the list of things that went well, and you probably saw all the difference between what was the first scenario versus this other scenario, and it did a much better job of leading the discussion and getting people to really want to talk. So let's go back to the slides. So things you want to think about in implementing focus groups is when should they be used? And focus groups really are great when you have limited time and resources and you want to have in-depth information about a topic. You can bring a group of people together and be able to get their dialogue going about the issue, and really sometimes that stimulates a discussion that's very meaningful. Focus groups, the ideal is between 6 to 8 individuals. I've done focus groups before where I've had more than that, and I can tell you that having 10 to 12 people in there becomes kind of crazy because of the moderator or the person who's leading the discussion. You are trying to help everybody have a voice and not let one person dominate. And when you have 10 to 12 people, it becomes really difficult to make sure that you hear from everyone and to still keep people them in within the time frame you've given them. Typically, a focus group would not be longer than 90 minutes. Most people probably like around 60 minutes, but 90 is doable as well. But beyond 90, that just gets too long for people. The composition of the participants becomes really important too. In the video, you notice that the topic area was about the students and how they were learning in a classroom setting. And you can imagine that if a professor was leading that discussion, students may not be as open and honest with their opinions than if it was a student, which in that case it was a fellow student who was conducting the interview. So it becomes important to know who the composition is of your participants and who should be leading that focus group. And the other thing too is sometimes you may have a situation where if you're interested in a very particular topic and not everyone can answer about that topic, then that's going to be uncomfortable. So think back in the video, the first scenario that was the bad example of a focus group. She had a question about Connect, and the one guy had never used Connect, he'd used Vista. All of a sudden, he's excluded because he can't answer questions about that particular platform, Connect. So if that becomes really important to know about Connect, then you want to make sure that everybody in that focus group has used Connect, that they have something to contribute. Another thing that you want to be aware of too is sometimes having males and females in a focus group together may change how they respond depending on what kind of an issue you're addressing in a needs assessment. Maybe you're trying to find out information about attitudes towards breastfeeding, and having males and females in the same focus group about breastfeeding may not result in the same responses as if you held focus groups with men only and focus groups with women only. You want to include open-ended questions. This is one of those times where, because you're doing something that's oral, you want to get more than a yes or no answer. So you want to ideally have open-ended questions. If you do have closed-ended questions, you always want to follow up with an open-ended question like, tell me more about that, or can you give me an example or an experience that you've had? it becomes really important that the person who's leading the discussion, called the moderator, that they are trained. It is a lot harder to be a moderator than sometimes it looks. Even what you saw in the video, it may seem like it's not too challenging, but you as the moderator, you have to understand the questions you want to ask and be able to guide the discussion. So oftentimes you may have a question, maybe you have 10 questions you're going to ask, and a person just answered question 3. Well, you're going to go with that and get dialogue around question 3, knowing that you don't need to come back to that question later. You might jump around questions, but you have to be listening to what people are saying and not too focused on where you're going next, because if you're focused on where you're going next, you may miss something the person has said, and you may have missed an opportunity to clarify or to dig deeper into understanding the meaning behind their comment. The concept of saturation, this means that it helps you to know how many focus groups do you hold. Well, you want to hold enough focus groups until you don't hear any new information. Not hearing any new information means you've reached saturation. The advantages of doing focus groups, I mentioned a little bit earlier. One is that you get the dialogue between individuals, which gets sometimes a richer discussion. The disadvantages is just with qualitative research. This can take more time to analyze and recruit and actually conduct than other methods, data collection methods. Also, if you're dealing with a sensitive topic, people may not want to talk about that in a group setting, so that could be a disadvantage as well. Interviews, on the other hand, these are one-on-one, where you're bringing in the person and you're asking open-ended questions again, listening to what they're saying and having it as a dialogue, more one-on-one. The person does need to be trained, the interviewer, the person who's giving the questions, again, because it takes practice in being able to ask questions in a way that's understandable, or if you need to rephrase questions, knowing how to do that, listening to the person and knowing your script to know if they're answering something further down on your script than what you originally asked, that you can carry that conversation and can keep the flow of dialogue. So the question might be, when would you use interviews over focus groups? Interviews really are useful if it's hard to get groups of people together at one time. It's also useful if you're talking about a sensitive topic that people wouldn't want to talk about with others, and they can feel more safe being in an interview setting. One other thing I would say is a disadvantage to using interviews is it definitely takes more time than focus groups, because you're doing it one-on-one. And maybe it depends on how many interviews you really need and what the intent of the interviews are. If you're just gathering information, maybe you don't need tons of interviews. Maybe you only need a handful, 10 or less, and maybe you have time to do that. But the recruitment and collection and analysis can be challenging, but the recruitment might be a little bit easier than focus groups, just because in this case you're only looking for scheduling a time with one person rather than 6 to 8 people. So that's the end of this section on thinking about data collection using qualitative methods.